It was just after 6 a.m. when the phone in Officer Erin Carter's kitchen rattled across the table, vibrating with a string of calls that all came from blocked numbers. She hadn't even had her coffee. Her badge was still on the hook by the door. But by the tone in the dispatcher's voice, shaky, desperate, she already felt her day veering off the rails. Fog smothered the sleepy town of Willow Creek, Oregon, as Erin gunned her cruiser down Main Street. Most folks were still curled up in bed, blinds drawn, but by the time she swung into the lot at Willowbud's preschool, she saw clusters of anxious neighbors standing in their slippers and robes, faces pinched with fear, clutching cell phones and murmuring in anxious huddles. That's never a good sign, Erin thought, heart pounding. The world was gray and breathless as she stepped out, but her German Shepherd partner, Ranger, was all electricity, ears flattened, tail stiff, eyes burning. He launched himself from the back seat before she could even grab his leash, landing in the wet grass and immediately pulling her forward with a strength that surprised even her. Erin gripped the leash so hard her knuckles went white, barely able to keep pace. Whatever he smelled, it was no raccoon or stray cat. The school itself was almost pretty in the dawn light, all blue trim and big windows and pastel murals of animals frolicking on the walls. But to Erin, it suddenly looked fake, like a movie set hiding something rotten underneath. She called out, "Anyone inside? Willow Creek PD!" but only got silence and a few frightened glances from the crowd. Ranger was whining now, low and insistent, circling the playground and then doubling back to the old art shed behind the swings. He began pawing frantically at the ground, snout pressed to the wet earth, his body vibrating with something primal and urgent. Erin's own chest tightened in response. This was no routine check. People were starting to crowd closer, a nervous murmur rippling through them. Erin shouted for everyone to stand back, her voice cutting through the morning stillness. She pulled Ranger off, barely, as he started digging with both front paws, sending muddy clumps flying. She got low, brushing aside the leaves and cold, sticky mud, and then she saw it. Half buried in the dirt was a tiny child's shoe. It was blood-stained, one pink shoelace untied, mud caked up around the heel. Erin's pulse thudded in her ears. She'd spent a decade telling herself that small towns like Willow Creek were safe, that nothing truly bad could happen here, at least not on her watch. But the shoe in her hand weighed 1,000 pounds, heavy with the threat of secrets and suffering. She looked up and met the eyes of Mrs. Paxton, the preschool's director, who stood frozen at the fence. The woman's hands trembled as she reached for her cell phone, voice quivering. "They called me this morning. Said something terrible happened. I thought it was a prank. This can't be real." Ranger kept whining, now tugging her toward the back wall of the shed. Erin's brain went into overdrive, run through protocol, secure the scene, call for backup. But all she could focus on was the filthy shoe in her palm and the way Ranger's hackles stood straight up. A group of parents burst through the playground gate, one mother sobbing as she scanned the faces for her daughter. "Is Madison here? Where's Maddie?" Her voice cracked. Another father grabbed Erin's arm, almost frantic. "What's going on? Why's your dog digging over there?" "Please, step back," Erin managed, voice barely steady. She motioned for everyone to stay clear, radioed for units, her heart racing. But the air felt thick, like something awful was about to crawl out of the fog. As the first rays of sunlight finally pierced the clouds, Erin looked down at the shoe, its bloody stains screaming out in the gentle morning. She forced herself to keep breathing, keep thinking. "Don't freeze up, Carter. Not now." Ranger whimpered and pushed his snout under the shed, his entire body straining as if to crawl beneath it. Erin dropped to her knees, feeling mud seep into her uniform, and peered into the darkness. All she could see were tangled cobwebs, bits of old paper, and something that looked suspiciously like a torn piece of pink cloth. A neighbor in the crowd gasped, covering his mouth. "Oh my God! Erin, is that—" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she felt a surge of something, fear, yes, but also a kind of desperate, painful hope. If a child had been here, maybe there was still time. Maybe she could still do something right. "Ranger, search," she commanded, her voice cracking with emotion. The shepherd surged forward, barking with renewed determination, his nose pressed to the ground. And in that moment, as neighbors whispered and children cried, Erin Carter realized she was standing at the edge of something far darker than anything she'd faced in Willow Creek before. She would have to choose, to be brave enough to look deeper, to trust her instincts, and to keep going, even as her own hands shook and her mind screamed to turn away. But as Ranger clawed at the earth, desperate and wild, Erin felt a tiny flicker of hope, a chance, however slim, that this story could end differently. That maybe, just maybe, she and Ranger could be the ones to bring a lost child home. The fog had barely lifted when the first squad cars arrived, lights swirling blue and red in the washed-out sunlight. Erin stood with mud on her knees, still clutching the blood-stained shoe, feeling the eyes of the town pressing in on her from every direction. But all she could really focus on was Ranger, circling the back of the art shed, nose pressed to the ground, tail stiff as a flagpole. She'd never seen him like this, obsessed, almost frantic. A uniformed deputy jogged over, breathless. "Backup's here. Fire and EMS on standby. What have you got?" Erin's voice was low. "There's something else back here. Ranger won't let it go, and—" She glanced down at the shoe, unable to finish the thought. Instead, she called out to the school janitor, a wiry old man in a brown cap who'd been lingering at the edge of the playground since her arrival. "Hey, Leonard, you've got the keys, right?" She forced her voice calm, but he hesitated, gaze darting between her, the crowd, and the shed. Yeah, but that door's been locked for months. Maintenance supplies only." "You sure it's necessary?" Ranger barked, sharp, angry. The parents and neighbors drew back, nerves stretched thin. "Open it," Erin said, brooking no argument. Leonard fumbled with his ring of keys, hands trembling so badly he nearly dropped them twice. Erin's own hands shook as well. She could feel the adrenaline burning through her veins, her breathing fast and shallow. The moment the padlock clicked open, a fetid blast of air spilled out, thick with the stench of mold, old paint, and something else. Something sickly sweet. Chemical. Wrong. Ranger shoved past Leonard's legs, sniffing frantically at every corner, every dark patch of floor. Erin flicked on her flashlight, the beam slicing through the gloom. The shed was cluttered with stacked chairs, art easels, paint-splattered aprons, and mops reeking of bleach. But at the back, half buried behind a pile of paint cans, she noticed something odd. A warped square in the floorboards, scuffed and dusty, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. She crouched, shining her light along the seam, and felt the memories start bubbling up. Yesterday, the little girl, Madison Young, sobbing in the nurse's office, face blotchy with tears. "I don't want to go down the stairs again," Madison had whispered, voice ragged with dread. Erin remembered offering her a plastic sticker, saying, "It's nothing, honey, just a bad dream." Guilt stabbed through her chest. If only she'd listened. Now as she pried up the loose board, the heavy trapdoor creaked open. The smell hit her full force, damp, musty, tinged with something metallic. She hesitated, swallowing hard. Ranger was right at her side, whimpering softly, eyes never leaving the darkness below. She shined her light into the opening. A steep set of concrete steps led down into a cramped, filthy room just big enough for a grown person to lie down in. The walls were scarred by water stains. There was no window, just a bare bulb flickering overhead. The place looked like it hadn't been cleaned or entered for years. But the details made Erin's stomach twist. A torn, once white blanket balled in the corner, patterned with cartoon animals. A hospital bracelet stained and marked M. Young. A battered stuffed rabbit missing an ear. Crumpled juice boxes and a single pink sock, damp with mold. There were coloring book pages taped to the wall. Scribbled rainbows. A crude drawing of a girl holding hands with a large brown dog. Erin's hands shook as she descended the steps, her flashlight dancing across the filth. Ranger followed, every muscle taut. But instead of barking, he let out a long, low whine and pressed close to her leg. The room was thick with the ache of old fear. She knelt, brushing aside the rabbit, inspecting the hospital bracelet. The silence was so deep she could hear her own heartbeat, each thud echoing her regret for every missed sign, every ignored plea. Ranger sat beside her, nose twitching as he tried to make sense of all the lost smells. She forced herself to stay focused. "Madison?" she called softly. "Are you here, sweetheart?" No answer. She swept her flashlight across the walls, lingering on the drawings. The same brown dog appeared again and again, sometimes with a badge on his collar, always drawn standing guard. The air felt heavy with a child's hopes, abandoned in the dark. A voice crackled through her radio, jolting her back. "Carter, you good down there? You need backup?" She swallowed. I'm okay. But we've got evidence. Hospital bracelet, personal effects. Get forensics here. Now." As she rose to leave, her hand brushed against the trapdoor, and she paused. Memories rushing in, unwanted. She'd been 6 when her own mother left her waiting at a gas station, promising she'd be right back. Erin still remembered the sickly, metallic taste of fear, the feeling of not knowing if anyone would come. That night had shaped her entire life, every choice. How many Madisons had she missed because she hadn't looked close enough? Because it hurt too much to remember. Upstairs, the janitor's voice echoed. "I told you, nobody goes down there. The place is condemned." Erin ignored him, grabbing a plastic evidence bag for the bracelet. She turned back to Ranger, who waited at the top step, tail still stiff but his eyes steady, almost reassuring. "Good boy," she whispered. She forced herself to stand tall, to face the crowd gathering outside. She would not fail these children again. As she pushed open the shed door, the sun finally broke through the clouds, illuminating the worried faces of parents and staff. For a moment, hope flickered, a promise that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. But as she looked at the evidence in her hand, the bracelet, the shoe, the torn drawings, she knew the real nightmare was only beginning. She'd opened a door that couldn't be closed, and whatever lay beneath Willow Bud's preschool was about to change everything. The hush in the cellar pressed down on Erin like a weight, damp and suffocating. Each breath she took tasted of mold, dust, and fear, the kind that burrowed under your skin and refused to let go. Her flashlight's beam was thin and jittery, quivering as she moved it across the filthy walls. The space felt too small for her and Ranger, let alone anyone else. Yet the drawings of the brown dog and the scattered remnants of childhood told a different story. Someone had spent far too much time here. Erin's boots squelched in something wet as she stepped deeper inside. She could hear the distant echo of voices up above. Officers, EMTs, parents. But it felt like another world, unreachable from this pit of lost things. Ranger was ahead of her, his movements uncharacteristically gentle as he nosed through the blankets and toys. For all his training, he'd always been a working dog first, a comfort second. But now, as if sensing the fragility of the moment, he crawled low, ears back, tail barely twitching. In the far corner, beneath a heap of blankets, a small figure trembled. Erin's throat tightened as she knelt beside her, every movement careful, slow, afraid the slightest sound might cause the girl to vanish like smoke. "Madison?" Her voice was little more than a whisper. "It's Officer Carter. I'm here to help you." The girl didn't answer at first, just curled tighter around herself, face buried in her knees. She was pale, skin smudged with dirt and tears, a pink band of hair barely visible under the grime. Erin's mind flashed to yesterday, when Madison had clung to her mother's legs in the school hallway, eyes huge with worry. Back then, Erin had thought it was just ordinary nerves, a little kid scared of the dark. Now, guilt bit at her hard. How many times had she brushed off these fears, made small talk, handed out stickers, and walked away? Ranger approached slowly, belly on the ground. He paused within arm's reach, lowering his head and offering a soft, reassuring sigh. The sound seemed to cut through Madison's panic. She peeked up, her eyes swollen but sharp, and watched as Ranger extended his paw, as if he knew just how fragile trust could be. A shudder ran through her small body. Then, almost imperceptibly, Madison reached out, fingers trembling, and pressed her palm to Ranger's head. He didn't move, just kept breathing deep and slow like an anchor in a storm. "Hey there, Madison," Erin tried again, forcing her voice steady, gentle. "It's safe now. We're going to get you out. No one's going to hurt you." The little girl's face crumpled. "You came back?" Her words were so soft, Erin nearly missed them. "I thought the monsters were going to come back. They always say to be quiet, or the monsters will come back." Erin felt her heart twist at the words. She saw her own reflection in the child's fear, the kind of loneliness that makes you forget how to hope. Memories from her own childhood flashed unbidden. The echo of her mother's car driving away, the way she'd clutched a stuffed animal until the fur wore off. All she'd wanted was for someone to prove they wouldn't leave. She blinked hard, holding back tears. "No monsters here, I promise." She knelt lower, resting a hand on the dirty floor, not reaching for Madison, just letting the space between them be filled with trust, not pressure. Madison sniffled, then slid her hand from Ranger's fur to Erin's fingers. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world shrank to the rhythm of Ranger's breathing, the hush of the cellar, the slight warmth of a child's trust, hard-won and fragile. Outside, radios crackled. Someone called Erin's name, but she didn't answer. This was the moment that mattered. Slowly, Madison's death grip on her own knees loosened. She let Erin wrap a gentle arm around her, pulling her into the half-light. Madison shook with every step, legs weak, but she didn't let go of Ranger's fur. As they neared the steps, Erin paused, her mind racing through procedures and protocols, but she couldn't help seeing herself in Madison's hunched shoulders. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're safe now. You did everything right." Madison shivered, squeezing Ranger's ear with a small, desperate hand. Is he going to bite the monsters?" Erin managed a broken smile. "Ranger. He scares monsters away just by being brave." She looked the child in the eye, searching for a flicker of hope. "And you're brave too. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you are." With Ranger leading the way, they climbed the steps together, Madison's bare feet leaving faint prints on the concrete. Each footfall was heavy with everything she'd survived, and everything Erin wished she could erase. As they reached the top, the room exploded in a blur of voices and bright lights. EMTs, police, frantic parents, everyone seemed to crowd in at once. But Madison wouldn't let go of Ranger or Erin, even as the paramedics wrapped her in a blanket and checked her vitals, her eyes wide and searching locked onto Erin's. "They told me if I screamed no one would come. They said the monsters would come back." The words spilled out in a ragged whisper. Erin knelt, badge forgotten, her own hands trembling. "I'm so sorry, Madison. I should have listened. I promise. No one's going to hurt you again." For a moment, Madison was just a little girl, sobbing into Ranger's fur, letting herself be comforted for the first time in what felt like forever. Ranger licked her tears, pressing his body protectively against her. The old wound in Erin's own chest ached. She knew healing wouldn't come fast or easy for either of them. But in that broken, beautiful moment, a small miracle occurred. Madison's hand, which had been balled tight for so long, slowly unfurled. She reached for Erin, holding tight, refusing to let go. And as the sun finally crept higher in the sky, spilling gold through the broken window, Erin realized something had changed. The darkness in the cellar wasn't absolute anymore. There was a way out, if they walked it together. And for the first time that morning, Erin let herself believe. Maybe, just maybe, hope was stronger than fear. The hospital waiting room glowed with the flat, colorless light of late evening, making every surface look scrubbed and unreal. Erin sat with her back straight, uniform smudged and hair half loose, not daring to let herself relax. The world outside had shrunk to a single hallway, where anxious footsteps echoed and the hum of vending machines drowned out human voices. She was used to chaos, the blare of sirens, the rush of an emergency call, but this stillness felt worse. Here, she had nothing to do but think. Madison was curled in a too-big chair next to her, a cartoon blanket pulled around her thin shoulders. She hadn't said much since the EMTs finished their exams. She'd let the nurses check her for bruises, bandage her skinned knee, even give her a cup of grape juice, but her eyes never left Erin or Ranger. It was as if she'd tethered herself to them, her lifeline in a world she still didn't trust. Ranger, exhausted but watchful, lay under Erin's chair, his nose pressed to her boot, ears flicking at every unfamiliar sound. He was calmer now, but every so often he'd glance at Madison and offer a slow wag, almost apologetic, as if promising her he wouldn't let anything slip by again. The hospital staff passed around the story of his rescue with quiet awe. "The hero dog," they whispered. But Erin knew better. Ranger was more than a hero. He was a witness, carrying the unspoken weight of the day. Erin's captain arrived just after 9, his shoulders hunched and his tie loosened, face lined from a long day. He sat beside Erin, eyes scanning the room before fixing on Madison. "Any change?" His voice was low, careful. "None," Erin answered. She smoothed the blanket around Madison, her own hands clumsy and awkward. "She hasn't let go of Ranger since we got here." "Not surprising," the captain said. "That dog's worth 100 officers right now." He hesitated, then leaned in. "Forensics found traces of sleeping meds in the cellar, enough to keep a child out for hours. The janitor and daycare director are in holding. Both are claiming they knew nothing. The lab will have more by morning." Erin stared at the floor, guilt pressing down on her like a lead blanket. "I should have listened to Madison. She tried to tell me yesterday, said she didn't want to go down the stairs. I thought she was just afraid of the dark. If I'd... Stop, the captain cut in, firm but gentle. You followed up as soon as you had something real. None of us expect to find a place like that in Willow Creek. But Erin couldn't shake it. The faces of other children flashed in her memory. Kids who'd vanished over the years, always written off as custody disputes or runaways. Had she missed something back then too? What if this was just the first door, not the last? A nurse stopped by with a clipboard, her voice kind but brisk. We're keeping Madison overnight for observation, Officer Carter. Her mother's still on her way, stuck in traffic out of Portland. She crouched beside Madison, offering a gentle smile. Would you like Ranger to stay with you tonight? Madison looked at Erin, hesitant, then nodded. Please, I don't want to be alone. Erin glanced at her captain, who gave a quick nod. We'll make it work. When the nurse left, Erin took a deep breath. The walls felt closer, the air stale. She remembered a time, years ago, when she'd been the one in a hospital bed, listening to distant voices argue about what to do with her. Nobody had stayed then. The only comfort had been the steady beat of a nurse's footsteps outside her door. She broke the silence, voice raw. Madison, you were really brave today. I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner. That's going to change. I promise. Madison didn't answer, but she shifted, edging closer until her head touched Erin's arm. For a while, they just sat like that. Two survivors, held together by fatigue and regret, the hum of the hospital around them. Ranger sighed and rested his chin on Madison's shoe, eyes drooping, finally letting himself relax. The captain returned an hour later carrying a manila folder. His face was grave. There's more. Since the news broke, families have called in, kids who vanished from daycares over the years. We thought they were custody disputes, but now not so sure. He set the folder in front of Erin, who flipped it open with shaking hands. Inside were grainy photographs, missing person flyers, old-school portraits, names Erin recognized, faces she'd dismissed or half forgotten. For a moment, shame nearly choked her. Madison stroked Ranger's ear, the motion almost meditative, and for the first time her own tears came, silent and unashamed. Erin let her cry, not trying to hush her, not promising it would be okay. She just listened, the way she wished someone had listened to her once. By midnight, the hospital had grown quiet. Madison drifted off at last, clutching Ranger's paw like a talisman. Erin sat in the dark, watching over both of them, badge heavy in her lap. The case was bigger than she'd imagined. More children, more secrets, more pain. But in the silence, a new resolve began to harden inside her. She wouldn't look away this time. She wouldn't shrug off another lost child as someone else's problem. She would listen, she would fight, and no matter how much it cost, she would protect those who had no voice. As Ranger slept, still keeping one eye on Madison, Erin traced the badge with her thumb. The past could not be changed, but the future, if she was brave enough to face it, might just be rewritten, one choice at a time. And somewhere deep in the stillness, hope flickered, faint but real. Healing wasn't a solo journey. It started in moments like these, built on trust, courage, and a promise to never turn away from another child in the dark. Night came to Willow Creek like a blanket pulled too tight. Shadows pooled in every corner, and the quiet felt unnatural, taut with everything unsaid. At Willow Bud's preschool, the playground was ringed with police tape, the swings twisting gently in the wind. The old art shed loomed as a monument to secrets. For Erin, this was where the world narrowed to a single question. How deep did the darkness go? She waited for the search team beside Ranger, who paced the yard, his nose low, hackles rising each time headlights flashed across the lot. Her heart thudded in sync with his restless energy. The evidence from the cellar, the hospital bracelet, the shoe, the sedatives, pointed to something premeditated, something ongoing. Still, Erin felt the old self-doubt gnawing at her. What if she missed something again? What if a child was still out there, waiting in the dark? Detective Miller, gruff and gray-bearded, joined her at the scene, eyes sharp in the gloom. You ready for this, Carter? Tunnels like this don't happen by accident. Erin nodded, jaw set. We go slow. We keep Ranger out front. There was no way she was leaving him behind tonight. Not after Madison, not after everything he'd already sensed before she could. The janitor, Leonard, had been taken into custody earlier, but somehow, by shift change, he'd vanished from his cell. The thought made Erin's skin crawl. She'd seen his unease earlier, the way he'd fumbled the keys, his fear sharp and genuine, but now it reeked of something else, desperation, guilt, maybe both. The team gathered by the cellar door, flashlights and radios at the ready. Erin crouched with Ranger, running a hand down his back. "Find," she whispered, and he pressed forward, nose to the ground, muscles trembling. Inside, the trapdoor yawned open, and Ranger darted down, ignoring the familiar blanket and toys. He stopped by the far wall, pawing at a loose section of crumbling concrete. Miller joined Erin, running his light along the cracks. "Looks hollow." They pried at the wall, dust stinging their throats, until a narrow passage opened up, just wide enough for a grown man to crawl through and black as pitch beyond the first few feet. The air that poured out was cold, stale, tinged with the scent of rot and something chemical. Erin's pulse skittered. "Ranger, with me," she said, strapping a reflective harness around his body. She slithered in after him, knees scraping, sweat slicking her palms. The darkness was complete, the air closing in, the only sound her breath and Ranger's careful padding. Behind them, Miller and two uniforms followed, lights flickering against the dirt walls. They crawled for what felt like forever. The tunnel sloped downward, then branched, then finally ended at a battered trapdoor beneath the crumbling foundation of the bakery next door. A place that had been shuttered for years, its windows covered in grime. Ranger was the first through. He barked, sharp and furious, the sound echoing through the abandoned space. Erin scrambled after him, sweeping her light across the bakery's ruined interior. Upturned chairs, moldy counters, flowers scattered across the tiles. But in the corner, past an empty display case, was a massive industrial freezer, padlocked and battered. Ranger circled the freezer, barking harder, pawing at the door. The team forced it open, bracing for the worst, but inside were no bodies, only hidden compartments, haphazardly stuffed with children's clothing, scribbled drawings, empty juice boxes, and a row of small, mismatched shoes. The stench of fear was thick. Erin's hands trembled as she sifted through the evidence. On the wall above the freezer, a handful of photographs were tacked in a row. Children's faces, most smiling, some clearly taken without consent. Madison's face was there, unmistakable in her pink jacket. Suddenly, footsteps echoed above, someone running on the main floor. Miller jerked his head, signaling the others. "Someone's here! Move!" Erin ducked behind a counter, heart pounding, while Ranger tensed at her side. The sound grew louder, a frantic scramble, then silence. Miller signaled for her to cover the back. Erin crept through the darkness, nerves on edge. Then she caught a glimpse, a shadow slipping through the back door, hunched and panicked. The janitor, Leonard. "Stop! Willow Creek PD!" Erin shouted, but Leonard bolted down the alley, vanishing into the night. In the aftermath, the team swept the building. They found more clues, crayons, half-eaten snacks, a plastic hair clip, and a battered journal with times and names. Ranger found a cache of torn drawings beneath a floorboard, scenes of children playing, always watched by faceless adults. But the biggest revelation came when Detective Miller cracked open the bakery's ancient security system, finding an old hard drive taped behind the counter. Hours of grainy footage scrolled past, most useless. But then, in the dim light, Erin spotted Leonard meeting with a well-dressed woman in a tailored coat. She pressed envelopes into his hands, her face just clear enough to identify. Caroline Rhodes, a name that echoed through Willow Creek's social circles, the town's most prominent philanthropist. Erin watched as Caroline nodded, her expression cold, before slipping out the side door. All these years, she'd been raising money for local schools and foster children, always the first to host a fundraiser, always the one holding the biggest check. Erin's mind reeled. Had everyone been fooled? "Who is she?" Miller asked, watching Erin's face. "Caroline Rhodes," Erin whispered, her stomach twisting. She's everywhere. On every board, every committee, and she's been working with Leonard for years." Ranger barked, sharp and urgent, snapping Erin back. The full scale of the operation began to take shape in her mind. This wasn't just a broken daycare, a rogue janitor, a single victim. This was something built, protected, hidden in plain sight. As she gathered the evidence, photos, clothing, ledgers, Erin felt the weight settle on her again. The circle of trust in Willow Creek had been corrupted, and every layer she peeled back revealed more rot beneath. But Ranger, tired and mud-streaked, stood at her side, resolute as ever, For every lie, every dark tunnel, there was still a way forward. One step, one child, one truth at a time. The night pressed in, but Erin's resolve sharpened. She would see this through. For Madison, for all the children who'd been lost in the dark. For the hope that maybe finally they'd found the first crack in a wall that had stood too long. Willow Creek rarely saw police convoys outside of parade season, but that morning a row of cruisers lined the gravel drive of Caroline Rhodes's lakeside estate. White columns glowing against the blue of the lake, gardens perfectly manicured, the world's chaos seemingly far away. Erin sat behind the wheel, hands tight on the steering wheel. She could see her own face in the rear view, drawn, eyes ringed with fatigue. Ranger shifted in the back seat, sensing the electricity in the air, ears pricked as officers took up their positions across the lawn. Caroline Rhodes. Her name was a fixture in Willow Creek, the Rotary Club, church picnics, every school fundraiser. She was always smiling, always giving. But in the grainy footage from the bakery's camera, her face had looked different, closed, calculating. Betrayal had an odd flavor. It was bitter, but also metallic, like the taste of blood after biting your tongue. Erin pressed the intercom at the gate, her voice flat. "Caroline Rhodes, this is Willow Creek PD. We have a search warrant." There was a pause, and then the iron gate creaked open. Caroline waited on the porch, a silk scarf knotted at her throat, smile thin. Her eyes slid past Erin to the officers fanning out across the yard, to rangers sniffing at the flower beds. "Is all this necessary, Officer Carter?" "I've always supported your department. Inside, please, ma'am." Erin kept her voice steady, careful not to show the anger boiling just below. She'd learned by now that the most dangerous adversaries wore no mask at all. Caroline led them to the library, sun filtering through tall windows, walls lined with first editions and family portraits. She stood with perfect poise, arms folded. But Erin noticed the trembling of her hands, the way her gaze darted to a set of drawers behind the desk. "Ranger," Erin said softly, unclipping his leash. The shepherd's nose went to work, tracing the edges of the room, pausing at a heavy antique cabinet. He sniffed, then whined, pawing at the side panel. "Open it," Erin said, ignoring Caroline's protests. The drawers slid open with a reluctant groan. Inside, files, dozens of them, organized in color-coded folders. Erin flipped them open. Adoption papers, forged birth certificates, photocopied IDs, pages and pages of children's names, ages, physical descriptions. Some files bore small, unmarked Polaroids, faces wide-eyed and uncertain. Madison's photo was among them, her name typed neatly above. For a moment, time stopped. Erin heard only her own heartbeat. The evidence was overwhelming, impossible to explain away. The files told a story of children funneled through a network, identities erased, trails vanished. Caroline's composure cracked. She took a step back, knuckles white on the mantel. "I don't know what you think you're looking at, officer. Those are confidential adoption records, private arrangements for families who—" Erin cut her off. "You paid Leonard Myers. We have you on video. You funded the daycare and the bakery. You moved children through those tunnels and covered your tracks with cash and paperwork." Caroline's mask faltered. Her breath hitched. But still, she tried. "You have no idea how hard it is to help children in this world. No idea what families, what mothers are willing to do to save them." From the hallway came a commotion. Madison's mother had arrived, face streaked with tears, voice raw with disbelief. She'd been shown the Polaroids, the file with her daughter's bracelet, the evidence Caroline had tried to hide. When she faced Caroline, the room trembled with rage and anguish. "You threatened us," she sobbed. "Said if we spoke up, we'd never see Madison again." Caroline's hands shook. The armor was gone. Only the trembling, hollow shell remained. I didn't want anyone to get hurt." "You hurt everyone," Madison's mother said, voice thick. "You broke every family you touched." For a moment the whole house held its breath. Caroline collapsed into a chair, hands over her face, the last of her pride leaking out in muffled sobs. While officers read Caroline her rights, Erin paced the room, digging through the rest of the drawers. At the bottom of the last file, she found a stained envelope. Inside was a hand-drawn map, connecting Willow Buds Preschool to 5 other facilities spread across Oregon and southern Washington. Addresses, phone numbers, lines drawn in red ink. This wasn't just Willow Creek. It was a network, a web stretched across state lines, protected by money, silence, and fear. Outside, the sun had burned away the morning fog. Madison waited in her mother's arms, both of them shaking, the tears finally coming. Erin stood nearby, not wanting to intrude, but Madison looked up and smiled. A small, broken thing, but real. Ranger came to stand beside them, tail wagging gently. The girl buried her face in his fur. "You found me," she whispered, as if she still couldn't believe it. Erin watched mother and daughter hold each other, reunited not just in body, but in spirit. For the first time, Madison let herself cry, safe in her mother's arms, surrounded by the silent witness of a dog who had never left her side. Back in the house, as Caroline was led away, Erin gathered the files, the map, and the evidence of lives broken and stolen. The betrayal ran deep, but so did the community's resolve. News spread fast, neighbors calling neighbors, teachers comforting children, the whole town reeling but rallying. The truth was out, and the silence that had protected so much pain was finally shattered. Standing in the middle of the storm, Erin felt her guilt give way to something else, a grim determination to see it through. This would not be buried, not again. Ranger nuzzled her hand, eyes wise and weary. Erin scratched behind his ears. "We're not done, buddy. Not by a long shot." As they drove away from the lake house, Erin glanced at the map in her lap. There were more names, more children, more places to search. But for Madison and her mother, for the children whose voices had finally been heard, this was the first morning that truly felt like hope. Midnight found Willow Creek lit by the glow of cell phones and flashlights, the hush of the old town replaced by a quiet, coordinated urgency. Erin Carter stood in the command trailer parked near the edge of the woods, reviewing maps and blueprints pinned across every surface. The map from Caroline's drawer, 5 facilities circled in red, spanning 2 states, had turned the investigation into something bigger than anyone here had ever imagined. Children were still out there, and every second mattered. The task force was a patchwork of local deputies, state troopers, and a pair of steely-eyed agents from the FBI. Tension buzzed through the air, the pressure of getting it right, of not making a mistake with so much at stake. Erin felt the weight in her bones but kept her focus sharp, channeling every ounce of doubt into preparation. She couldn't afford another regret. Not tonight. Ranger, already in his vest, sat at her feet, eyes locked on her face. She gave him a gentle pat. "You ready for this?" His tail thumped once against the floor, steady and quiet, a soldier's answer. She ran through the plan again with the team. Simultaneous raids on all 5 sites. Erin and Ranger would lead the team assigned to the most remote and dangerous, the old Dalton farmhouse on the outskirts of Willow Creek, its windows boarded, its fields overgrown. They'd learned from the files that the Daltons were the shadowy couple running the network for decades, slipping between aliases and shell companies, always one step ahead. No one would get away this time. At 1:12 a.m., the radios crackled to life. "Go!" The night swallowed them as they rolled down the old logging road, tires crunching over gravel, headlights off. Fog crept low along the ground, turning the fields into a haunted sea. Erin felt her nerves vibrate as they parked at the edge of the tree line, the farmhouse rising like a black tooth against the sky. She led the team up the back path, Ranger by her side, her Glock drawn but held low. The world narrowed to her breath, the drumbeat of her heart, the soft scuff of boots behind her. Every step was a question. Who was waiting inside? Would they find children? Was she too late? Ranger paused at the porch, sniffing the air, then whined. A warning. Erin signaled her team to split, 2 covering the front, 2 circling left. She pressed her hand to Ranger's back. "Steady, boy." He led her to a cracked cellar door at the side of the house, its lock twisted from years of use. She listened, nothing but the pulse of the night. Then from inside, a muffled cry. A child's voice, terrified and small. Erin's gut clenched. She forced the door with a crowbar, the wood splintering beneath her grip. Ranger slipped through first, his silhouette melting into the dark. Erin followed, gun at the ready, flashlight flickering over peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. The air was heavy with dust, the stink of fear and neglect. A figure darted in the shadows, a man, rail thin, panicked, the janitor, Leonard. Erin's voice cut through the dark. "Stop! Police!" He bolted, knocking over a lamp, scattering glass. Erin chased him down a narrow hall, heart pounding. Behind her, Ranger barked, the sound echoing like a warning. She rounded a corner, saw Leonard fumbling with a window latch, wild-eyed, desperate. "Don't do it!" Erin shouted, her voice raw. But Leonard lunged for the window. In a heartbeat, Ranger leapt, latching onto his jacket, dragging him to the ground. Leonard struggled, shrieking, but Ranger held firm until backup swarmed in, cuffs clicking tight. Down the hall, Erin heard another cry. She pushed into a tiny, filthy room. 3 children huddled together, cheeks streaked with tears, faces blank with shock. A 4th child, silent, stared at her as if not sure she was real. Erin knelt, voice trembling with relief. "It's okay. You're safe now." The children didn't move at first, but when Ranger padded in, muddy, panting, eyes soft, one little boy burst into tears, clutching Ranger's fur like a lifeline. Outside, the task force swept the house. 3 more children found, malnourished but alive. They radioed updates, raids across the map, children recovered, suspects in custody. The network was falling apart, link by link. Erin escorted the children out into the pre-dawn light, wrapping blankets around shivering shoulders, feeling a surge of relief so powerful she nearly doubled over. Parents and social workers arrived, weeping, clutching their children as if afraid to ever let go. Cameras flashed. But Erin didn't care about any of that. She cared only for the way Madison, safe in her mother's arms, ran to her, sobbing, "You found them! You really found them!" Ranger, muddy and tired, stood watch beside her, chest heaving, gaze never leaving the kids. He was a hero to everyone here, but to Erin, he was something more, the soul of the case, the anchor she clung to when hope was hard to find. When the last child was loaded into an ambulance, Erin collapsed on the farmhouse steps, Ranger at her side. She let the exhaustion catch up with her, the tears, the shaking hands, the knowledge that, for once, they'd done it right. Later, as dawn crept over Willow Creek, word came down from headquarters. Interrogations had cracked open the Daltons' entire operation. Names, accounts, secrets spilled out. They'd been running this ring for decades, hidden in plain sight, using the system's blind spots as cover. It was bigger than Willow Creek, but it would end here. The children would heal. Some scars would last forever, but so would the bonds formed in the darkness. Erin sat with Ranger as the sun rose, his fur graying, his eyes tired but proud. The fight was not over, but this night the monsters had lost. A cold wind swept down the forest road. The pre-dawn darkness pressed tight around the trees, the headlights of Erin's cruiser slicing through shifting curtains of mist. Willow Creek was waking up to sirens, the chatter of news vans and relief, but for Erin Carter, the night wasn't finished. She gripped the wheel, knuckles white, while Ranger dozed restlessly in the passenger seat, his breath fogging the glass. The whole task force was stretched thin, but Erin's phone had just buzzed with a message that burned through her fatigue. The Daltons, the ring's masterminds, were on the run, fleeing with 2 children in their care. She gunned the engine, heart pounding. The tip had come in from a farmer whose truck had been forced off a remote logging road. He'd caught a glimpse of a white van, 2 adults, and the frightened faces of children in the back seat. Erin had barely paused to call it in, just enough time to throw on her vest, clip Ranger's harness, and roar off into the woods with a single desperate prayer. Let me get there in time. Her mind churned as she drove, every mistake, every missed clue rattling in her head. The Daltons had eluded justice for years, slipping through gaps in the system, using money, lies, and threats to stay hidden. Now, in their final desperate hour, they'd gone to ground, but Erin wouldn't let this end in the shadows. She saw it then, a glint of white through the trees, a van wedged crooked on the muddy track. Erin killed her lights, coasting to a stop, heart jackhammering in her chest. She drew her weapon, eyes scanning the undergrowth, every sense on fire. Beside her, Ranger tensed, tail flicking, muscles coiled. The world shrank to a single purpose: find the children. End this. She stepped from the cruiser, boots sinking into the cold mud. Fog drifted across the road, muting every sound. Erin moved in silence, Ranger close at her knee. She heard voices, low, frantic, a woman pleading and a man swearing. Through the cracked window of the van, she saw 2 children huddled in the back, eyes wide with terror. "Willow Creek PD," Erin called, gun steady, voice firm but shaking with adrenaline. "Step out of the vehicle, hands up, now!" There was a pause, a split second of decision, the air electric with risk. Then the driver, a broad-shouldered man with cold eyes, revved the engine, tires spinning. The van lurched forward, swerving toward Erin in a last-ditch, reckless attempt to escape. Erin braced herself, shouting, "Stop! Don't!" But Ranger acted first. In a blur of fur and muscle, he charged, launching himself through the half-open passenger window. The children screamed as Ranger landed inside, snarling, pinning the driver back, jaws clamped on his arm. The van slewed sideways, tires spinning uselessly in the mud, before finally lurching to a halt against a fallen log. The doors flew open. Erin rushed in, dragging the driver, the Dalton patriarch, from the seat, cuffs biting his wrists. The woman, shaking and pale, tried to run, but another officer tackled her in the ditch, mud streaking her face. The two children, sobbing, tumbled out, clinging to each other and then to Erin, their small hands cold and desperate. But it was Ranger that held Erin's focus. Her partner, her friend, lying in the footwell, a gash on his shoulder, bleeding, breath ragged. "Ranger!" she cried, kneeling in the mud, cradling his head. "Stay with me, buddy. You're okay. You're okay." The world shrank to the thud of her heart, the whisper of the wind, the fragile hope in her voice. She pressed her hand to Ranger's fur, feeling the blood slick and hot beneath her palm. The children knelt beside her, tears running clean lines down their dirty faces. One little girl stroked Ranger's ear. "He saved us," she whispered, voice trembling. "He's my hero." Other officers arrived, handcuffing the Daltons, loading them into cruisers, radioing for EMTs. The sun was just cresting the treetops, painting the scene with a thin gold light that made everything look unreal. The nightmare was over, but the cost lay heavy in Erin's arms. She pressed her forehead to Ranger's, tears blurring her vision. "You're not leaving me," she murmured. "Not now. You hear me? We're not finished yet. You're a good boy, the bravest." The paramedics worked quickly, bandaging Ranger, starting fluids, whispering promises Erin barely heard. She stood as the Daltons were led away, faces blank with defeat. Their arrest would make headlines across the state, would crack open every shell company, expose every gap in the child protection system they'd exploited for decades. But for Erin, the only thing that mattered was the way the children clung to Ranger, calling him my hero, and the way the shepherd, bloodied and exhausted, still wagged his tail when they touched his muzzle. As they loaded Ranger onto the gurney, Madison arrived, her mother clutching her hand. She ran to Erin, sobbing, and buried her face in her side. Erin held her tight, whispering, "We did it. You're safe. You're all safe." The children's parents arrived, weeping with relief. Strangers embraced. The forest was filled with a strange hush, the weight of what had almost been lost, the awe of having survived it. As the ambulance doors closed, Erin kissed Ranger's head, her voice a promise. "You saved them, old friend. You saved us all." She watched as the sun rose over Willow Creek, lighting up a world forever changed by a single desperate night. The monsters were gone, but the scars would remain, a reminder of what was nearly lost, and what was saved through loyalty, love, and the courage to stand in the dark. A month passed, and Willow Creek breathed again, but it was not the same breath as before. The old daycare, once painted with bright cartoon animals, had been torn down to its foundations. In its place, behind a ribbon of yellow caution tape and a sign reading, "Future Home, Willow Creek Child Advocacy Center," volunteers worked under the October sun, pouring new concrete, hanging banners, planting flowers. The air felt lighter, but the healing was raw and ongoing, a kind of ache that belonged to everyone. Erin Carter stood at the edge of the construction site, arms crossed over her jacket, watching the scaffolding go up. She wore her badge, but not her uniform. Today, she wasn't just a police officer. She was a member of a wounded community, a face in the crowd, another soul learning how to move forward. Her gaze drifted to the playground, where children ran between the swings, laughter ringing bright as bells. Some of them glanced shyly at her, then at Ranger, now retired, his muzzle frosted, his limp more pronounced each week. The kids didn't seem to mind. They called to him, waving squeaky toys, offering scraps of their sandwiches. He took each treat with gentle patience, tail thumping, letting little hands bury themselves in his fur. Parents, too, stopped to say thank you, voices hushed with the weight of all they'd witnessed. The town itself was different. Doors that had always been closed were opening. People talked now, at the grocery store, in the pews at church, at the new support groups held in the community center gym. They shared stories, warnings that once would have been whispered, grief that could finally be spoken out loud. No one said it could never happen here anymore. They knew better, and knowing, painful as it was its own kind of strength. Madison and her mother met Erin every Saturday, a ritual that began with coffee and always ended at the park. Erin never failed to notice the changes in Madison, the way she ran to greet her, Ranger's favorite squeaky duck clutched tight, how her voice had grown louder, her questions bolder, her laughter brighter. Once, Madison had hidden behind her mother's legs, unable to meet Erin's eyes. Now, she begged to sit on the swings with her, to race Ranger around the pond, to hear stories of how the bravest dog in Oregon had found her in the dark. Sometimes, Madison's mother joined them on the bench, hands resting on her knees, voice quiet but warm. "She asks about you every day," she told Erin once. "She says you're the bravest grown-up she knows. I think you saved me too." Erin smiled, but there was a sadness behind it. She'd saved what she could, but so much had been lost. Sometimes at night she still saw the cellar, the tunnels, the haunted faces of children who would always carry the shadows with them. She saw her own childhood reflected there, her own pain, the years spent believing no one would come. The difference now was that she wasn't alone. None of them were. Ranger's retirement was a gentle affair. No big party, just a gathering in the park. Children drew signs and made him a paper crown. Parents baked cookies, shaped like badges and bones. The local paper ran a front-page story with a photo of Ranger surrounded by kids, their hands on his back, Erin kneeling beside him. The caption read, "Heroes Rest." But Ranger still went on patrol with Erin sometimes, his limp slowing him but not stopping him. To everyone in Willow Creek, he was more than a police dog. He was proof that loyalty could heal, that scars could be worn as medals, that love, steady and persistent, could pull you back from the edge. The changes went deeper than ceremonies. At a packed town hall meeting, survivors and families gathered for the first time. Some spoke, voices shaking, about what they'd lost. Others just listened, heads bowed. When it was Erin's turn, she stood at the microphone, her notes unread in her hand. "I missed the signs," she began, voice wavering. "I let myself believe the world was safer than it was. I let fear keep me silent sometimes, afraid to ask hard questions, to trust my instincts. That can't happen again. I promise I'll do better. We all have to." There were tears, and there was applause, but mostly there was relief. Someone had said it out loud. The silence was broken. In the following weeks, the community launched a new task force: parents, teachers, social workers, even students. They set up hotlines, offered training on how to spot abuse, and made a vow never to ignore a warning sign again. Local reporters dug through old cases, exposing cracks in the system. There was pain in every revelation, but also a growing sense of solidarity. People were learning that true healing didn't come from pretending nothing happened. It came from facing the truth together. One afternoon, Erin visited the new center, a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. She left some at the entrance for the children who were saved, and some for those who weren't. Ranger walked beside her, tail low, eyes bright with memory. They watched as a class of kids painted the lobby windows with rainbows, their laughter echoing in the halls that once held only silence. Erin found herself reflecting on what it meant to be a protector. She had once thought it was about heroics, chasing suspects, solving cases, being brave. Now she saw it differently. Protection was showing up, even after failing. It was listening, owning your mistakes, and helping others heal, even when it hurt. It was choosing to be present, again and again, no matter how heavy the past. The real lesson was that healing, like hope, was a communal act. The trauma wasn't hers or Madison's alone. It belonged to the town. And every time they came together, sharing grief, building something new, choosing to believe in one another, they made it harder for evil to hide. As Ranger nosed her hand, Erin smiled through tears. The monsters would always exist, but so would the protectors, the listeners, the ones who never gave up. For every wound, there could be 1,000 hands reaching to heal it, and that, she realized, was the truest form of hope. Willow Creek's park glimmered beneath a morning sun, grass sparkling with dew and the soft promise of summer. A crowd had gathered, lining up along the walkway drawn by a rare event, Ranger's public retirement ceremony. It wasn't just a formality, it was a living testament to survival and change. Balloons drifted above the benches, children in bright shirts wove between picnic tables, and parents stood with arms crossed over hearts, their faces full of stories they'd never imagined living through. At the heart of it all, Ranger sat on a small stage, flanked by bouquets of yellow daisies and a banner that read, "Thank you, Hero." His muzzle was silvery, his gait slow, but his eyes were alight with that deep, soulful calm, the look of a dog who had seen darkness and had chosen to love anyway. Erin stood behind him, hands lightly resting on his fur, her police badge glinting on her chest. She wore civilian clothes today, but her presence still commanded the space. This moment, she knew, was not about medals. It was about what came after the hard parts, the building, the remembering, the hope. Madison took the stage next. She wore a yellow dress, her hair tied back with a ribbon, eyes shining and nervous. She carried a note card in one fist and, in the other, Ranger's favorite squeaky toy. She glanced at Erin, then at the sea of expectant faces, her voice trembling as she read, "Thank you for being my hero when I was scared. Thank you for not giving up, even when it hurt. You taught me that being brave means helping other people, even if you're afraid." The crowd was silent, a hush so deep that you could hear the birdsong and the creak of the swings. A few people brushed away tears. Madison crouched beside Ranger, arms thrown around his neck. "I love you," she whispered into his fur. Erin watched from the side, her own throat tight, memories flashing behind her eyes. The first day in the fog, Ranger's frantic barks, the terror in Madison's voice, the tunnels, the old farmhouse, the impossible odds. The world felt changed now, larger and somehow softer. Erin realized she could breathe a little deeper. She saw parents holding their children close, neighbors smiling at each other, people who'd once been strangers nodding in recognition. In this town, where darkness had hidden for so long, the light was finally winning. When her turn came, Erin stepped to the microphone. She didn't read from notes. "Ranger isn't just a police dog," she said. "He's a part of this community. He's proof that you don't have to be perfect to be a hero. You just have to show up. You have to care. And when you make mistakes, you try again. That's what he taught me." That's what I hope we can all remember. Applause swelled, not loud or raucous, but steady and warm, a kind of music that settled in the bones. As part of the ceremony, the new Child Advocacy Center announced a program called Ranger's Pals, inspired by his work. Rescued and trained dogs would be paired with children healing from trauma. The kids would learn to care for them, to trust again, to share their stories with friends who would never judge or leave. Erin watched as parents signed up, hands trembling, hope shining in their eyes. It wasn't just a memorial to Ranger. It was a promise that what he'd started would continue, a legacy of protection, trust, and second chances. That day, the town's old silence, once thick with shame and denial, felt lighter, as if the very air had been swept clean. There was still sorrow, still grief, but also a sense that the community's worst wounds could now be named, understood, and cared for. Willow Creek had learned that being a guardian meant more than catching the bad guys. It meant choosing every day to see the people around you, to listen, to speak up, to love. Erin spent the afternoon walking the park's path, Ranger limping beside her, accepting pats and treats, the children trailing behind them like a parade. She saw the advocacy center bustling with volunteers, teachers learning new protocols, social workers counseling families. She watched Madison dart across the grass, her yellow dress bright as hope, calling out to friends with a laugh that rang clear and strong. Later, as dusk settled, Erin returned alone to the advocacy center, standing before the door in the quiet. She placed a bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, bluebells, forget-me-nots, beside the entrance, a ritual she'd begun for the children lost and found, for Ranger's courage, for every mistake and every bit of grace the town had offered itself. In the glow of porch lights, she traced her finger over the engraved plaque. "For all who protect and all who heal, Willow Creek remembers." The work, she knew, wasn't finished. There would always be darkness, always another child at risk, always some old wound aching in the night. But now there was also vigilance and compassion and a shared responsibility that had come from truth-telling and pain. People understood finally that justice and healing were journeys, a promise kept not by a single act, but by what the community chose together again and again. Ranger, tired but proud, settled at her feet. Erin sat with him in the gathering dark, feeling the town's heartbeat steady and strong around her. For a long time, she just breathed. She thought about what it meant to leave a legacy, not in headlines or medals, but in the lives changed by courage, by forgiveness, by love that refused to quit. And so, as night settled over Willow Creek, Erin whispered a promise to the silent sky, to the children she'd sworn to protect, to the dog who had taught her the meaning of loyalty. We will not forget. We will do better. Together, we are the light. If this story moved you, please like and follow our channel. Share your own stories of hope, courage, and healing. Remember, in every community there are silent heroes, and sometimes it takes just one person or one loyal dog to change the world for the better.